Okay, so I just wanted to say welcome for Heidi's thesis defense, which we're very excited about. I want to say thank you very much to Katie Lackenby and her son. And it's perfect for this particular thing. And to Vern Miller for being readers for this thesis. So Heidi, you get to present. And then after that, each of the readers is going to maybe make comments, ask questions. I will probably add my little 2 cents, and then it'll all be over and you can smile.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. All right, I will share my screen. Okay, can you folks see that? Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. And thank you for reading. I want to apologize first and foremost. I had sent the wrong version of my thesis the first time. I sent you all the updated version a couple days ago, so I wanted to apologize for that first off. It was all basically the same information, but the second one was cleaner. But my name is Heidi. I am presenting on how parenthood impacts the music therapist. Okay, so first off, this is just an overview of the project of my thesis. Main purpose was to examine how therapists are impacted by parenthood. The method that I used was a focus group with music therapists who are parents. For data collection, I listened to audio. I recorded everything over Zoom. I listened to the audio. I transcribed it. I read through the transcription a few times, listened back to the audio part a few times, and then I went through and found the main themes and also found the sub-themes. For the main themes that we'll go over in detail are challenges, reciprocal impacts, a juggling act, and an expansion of self. So first off, there is a lot that influences who I am and the way that I exist and this study. For this particular study, this is what I feel is the most important to know about me. I'm 28 years old, or I was 28 years old for the majority of this study. I'm 29. I'm a heterosexual, white, married, cisgender woman. I'm also a working parent, and I was the one who gave birth. So motivation for research, full transparency. I deleted my first thesis accidentally. My initial thesis was on imposter syndrome, and I was very passionate about it. And we had planned to have a child right at that last semester so that the baby would be the sleepiest and I'd just work on my thesis and it would be beautiful. And it was. And then in that sleep deprivation phase, I was cleaning out my laptop and I deleted every possible shred that I had. I almost did quit the program because at that point, I had learned all that I wanted to learn, and I was kind of considering just not getting the piece of paper. But I met with Dr. Hadley instead, which was great. And she really talked me through it and sort of pointed out the fact that, I was so not motivated anymore because I had a new passion in life, which was my son. After her and I spoke about it, this thesis started to form. I realized that I had changed personally. I was not motivated to finish school or return to work, which are two things that were very, very motivating to me beforehand. Professionally, I was also finding that I had changed. I had always dreamed of being a full-time worker. I love music therapy. I love the population I'm working within. Never thought that I would be a stay-at-home mom. And then as I got to know my son more and more, I was very considering just never going back to work or part-time or something. Which I never even dreamed that would be something I wanted. And then the other motivation I sort of had was I began to wonder what others were experiencing. I don't have any music therapy parent friends, so this is a very new world for me in a lot of ways. And I wondered what others were experiencing and just sort of what that was looking like because I couldn't really find any resources. For literature review, there's a lot of research about how music therapy about how pregnancy affects the clinician and their relationship with the clients. But there's not much about how parenthood affects the clinician. especially in the field of music therapy. This one study by, I believe it's Dindoyle. In my head, I pronounce it both ways, so I apologize. But this is the only one in music therapy that I could find. So this is the only one that had to do with this particular topic of parenthood. They found that there was sort of three main themes. The first was conflict and growth emerged, drawing from a motherhood toolkit. So that was described as musical creativity, enhanced empathy, compassion for the client's parents, and also being in the moment with clients. And then the other sort of finding that Dindoyle had was determining new therapist boundaries once they returned back on site. And Dindoyle, that was in terms of how therapists interacted with their clients in terms of like self-disclosure. What they told them about their private lives had changed from before they had children to when they did have children. Smith had a study in 2018 where the main findings were changes in empathy, and this was found in two different ways. The first way was increased empathy for the parents of their clients, and the second way was decreased empathy for clients who were abusive in various ways toward children. This study, so as I was saying earlier, there's a lot that has to do with pregnancy. And I took most of those out for my literature review, even though I did read a few. Wolf I kept in because they did speak about pregnant clinicians, and then there was a little portion about after they had given birth. So I did review this study. They found that there was increased empathy, like the others have found. New boundaries also needed to be found. And the participants here also felt that they had more understanding towards the clients that they were working alongside who were mothers. So in 1994, Derry had a study where they found that, again, there was less judgment towards parents. Participants felt that they now had more emotional knowledge about the parents who they were working alongside. Again, there was an increase in empathy, which is a theme here. And then there was also no longer thinking that parental actions are pathology. So in this particular study, I believe, I did not write this down, I apologize. I'm pretty sure it was this particular study where beforehand the parents were saying that they had always thought of their clients' parents, if they had parented a certain way, the clients wouldn't act as if they were acting. And then after they became parents, they realized that that's not quite how parenthood works all the time. And so they had that realization. Just a few short ones on this one slide. Derry had another study in 1992. The main theme was that clinicians felt they had a greater experiential knowledge of child development after having gone through it as a parent. Smith found similar, they had a better understanding of child development, and so did Jalowek in 2011. Clinicians felt more attuned to the child client's needs after parenthood. Just a few more briefly, Robinson. Participants wanted more work and life balance than they had before having children. They found that there was guilt and grief alongside the conflict of roles that they had. They found that they modified their work hours after becoming parents, and they had a new understanding of themselves as clinicians specifically. And then lastly, there's a few short ones here. Zaxton found that participants also modified their work hours. Goldman had their participants found difficulty finding balance between the two full-time jobs, that being parenthood and then working as a clinician. And lastly, Jalowek also found that difficulty in balance between being a parent and working with children, but specifically here, children who have experienced trauma. Those parents found it much more difficult in finding out ways to sort of cope with that after being home with their child and then seeing children who have gone through very traumatic things. So for my method, interpretive phenomenological analysis. So this was in order to gain a full understanding of the life experience of each participant. This is a qualitative research methodology that focuses on individuals, so each individual person and their personal stories. This is also a constructivist paradigm where reality is socially constructed by the participants and the researchers. I chose to do a focus group so the participants could fully share their own experiences with context. And then lastly, there was an identification of themes where I used Atlas TI to go over the transcript to find the themes and the sub-themes. And then for the method, the other thing I wanted to add was initially I had thought about possibly doing individual one-on-one interviews, but the more I thought about it, I chose to do a focus group because I really wanted the participants to be able to speak to one another and build off of each other's sort of rapport and maybe ignite other memories and feelings that they forgot they might have had. So I chose a focus group rather than individuals just because I wanted more of that conversation element. For the participants, I recruited by purposeful sampling. Dr. Hadley assisted me with this. She gave me 6 parents that had been through the program who are working music therapists. I reached out to them. One of those participants was a male who had not given birth, and the other 5 were women who had given birth. But the day before our focus group, one participant dropped out, and then the morning of the non-birth giving participant dropped out. So unfortunately, we don't have that perspective here. So the people that did end up coming and participating were 4 cisgender women. There was a nice age range between 27 and 42 at the time of their first child. And then they were all music therapists who had full-time jobs prior to having children in the field of music therapy. So the focus group was very light and friendly. 3 out of the 4 women were in the same cohort together at Slippery Rock. And then 1 was in a different cohort, but they had all sort of seen each other just due to the nature of the music therapy program. It was 1 hour and 47 minutes and a semi-structured interview. It started, they hadn't seen each other in a few years. They started talking to each other, asking about children. And then when it was time to jump into it, just, I think because they all had that same, that like friendship that already sort of existed between them, it was easier for them to just immediately get vulnerable and dive right in. Here are a few examples of the interview questions. There was a total of 11. I didn't ask every single one, but I had them in front of me. Sometimes as the women were speaking, they started touching on a different area that I had already planned to talk about, so I didn't repeat those questions. And then for this interview, I really just tried to stay out of it as much as possible. I just sat back, observed, took notes, and then when there was too long of a pause, I would ask the next question and then just sort of facilitate it that way. These are just a few examples that I laid out here. Most of this were just one-off questions like these top 3. Then I also gave an example of a main question, like in what ways has parenthood impacted your work as a music therapist? And then under that, I had 2 other ideas. Have your career goals changed, or has your interest or investment in your work changed? Both, being influenced by music therapy. Okay, so there were themes and sub-themes that were found. And we'll be going into these in detail in just a second. But the first theme was challenges. Under here, the sub-themes were workplace support, separation and boundaries, and having no me time. The second theme was reciprocal impacts. That was music therapy knowledge as a parent, and then new client insights after becoming a parent. Third theme was a juggling act, where there was difficulty with balance and making career choices with their families in mind. And then lastly, an expansion of self, where there was change in priorities, navigating morals and values, authenticity, change in attitude, and then a sense of becoming flexible. For this next section, the first PowerPoint that I created, when I tested it, it was like over an hour and a half long. So I condensed this section greatly. So I'm actually combining sort of the themes and the discussion at once, because I had found that bouncing back and forth was getting it was a little much. But if there are any questions, please. So challenges, again, workplace support, separation and boundaries, and having no me time. So first, we're going to go over workplace support. This was a finding that was unique to the study. And this was something that was spoken about for quite a while in the group. I would say it was the most active conversation that they had, with every single woman chiming in and sharing their stories. And And all participants contributed the experience where the workplaces had failed them. They all had found a lack of support in terms of their pregnancies, maternity leave, or returning to work. One participant, Pat, did state that she had support, but felt that it was probably due to the fact that her direct supervisor had a child a couple months before she did. And she wondered aloud, if there had been a man in that position who had not given birth, would they have had the same information that she was looking for in terms of maternity leave? Because that seemed to be the way that everybody's workplace was failing them. I gave an example quote on all of these pages just to give a broader idea of what we're talking about. And here we see Leslie saying, they don't tell you anything like when you're what you're supposed to do with FMLA. I had to research everything because there was nothing in place. And this was similar to findings that Dindoyle and Jalowick had. Dindoyle had all participants describe the importance of feeling supported at work, which at first I was thinking was the same. But the more that I read that study again and reflected on this theme, that study was more specific to participants saying that they shared the structure that they had at work within sessions. They weren't necessarily supported by the workplace surrounding them. They just liked the structure that they had. And then Jalowick found that participants did have supportive workplaces, but when reading this study, it's more due to the supervision that they get in the workplace and not actually that they had all the answers that they were looking for. All right, our second one is separation and boundaries. This was apparent in the conversation between all the participants. Everybody shared feelings of experiencing an intentional or unintentional shift in what they're willing to accept in the workplace and where new lines needed to be drawn. So separating the personal from the professional, Lynn, one of her quotes was, I find myself consistently checking the line of human connection and professional boundary and making sure that I'll end up at a place where I can stay balanced and effective. Pat had some boundary settings where they said, there's been multiple times with previous interns where I've stayed late because stuff has come up and we've got to talk about it. And I'm leaving work late and I'm coming home late and I'm just not going to do that this time around. With Lynn, we see that there's two parts of herself in the room with the client. In that moment, she has to make decisions about which part of herself she's going to draw from, finding that separation between clinician and parents, while also existing as a clinician and as a parent and being informed by both of those perspectives. Dindoyle had a similar finding here, where their participants shared that they had a need for firmer emotional boundaries in order to not let the role of mother take over the session. And then we have no me time. So this theme of never being alone emerged throughout the conversations. Each participant that I spoke with, or that was part of the focus group, had at least, or had a partner and at least one child. And so there was sort of that theme of just never being alone. There's always somebody with you, and then you're at work. They didn't mention self-care in this focus group, but the theme of never being alone was present throughout all of the stories that the women shared. Being alone was not necessarily something that they shared they needed, but it was more in a sense of like something had changed and now they were never alone. Leslie does say, though, she has so much going on. She used to watch TV and just to decompress, but now she doesn't even have time. She needs to engage with her child. And then later she said, she's just trying to find 5 minutes to herself. It's so hard. And she is somebody that needs to fully recharge. This finding sort of aligned with Jalowick because of Leslie's follow-up comment saying that she needed to find time to herself, which I think could fit under the broader umbrella of self-care, being crucial for well-being. Even though that wasn't directly what she came, I think needing to find 5 minutes, she needs that self-care. We're at our second out of our four themes, reciprocal impacts. So again, this is the music therapy knowledge and the new client insights. There were several reciprocal impacts in terms of the parent's role as a music therapist, and then the impact of the music therapy training on the role as a parent. So this first part is how the knowledge that being a music therapist has gained or the knowledge that the music therapist has gained in their training and how that has impacted their parenting. So Lynn, as part of preparing for her birthing experience, she intentionally prepared soundtracks and was part of her own, prepared soundtracks as part of her self-care to prep for her mental state for labor. And then later she also shared that this was we were talking about children, our children and their music. And she said she sometimes has to turn off my analytical brain and just be in the present moment and be in the music and just turn off my brain that wants to understand it and just allow myself to experience it. I feel like if I wasn't a music therapist, I would probably just be in it instead of being about it. I really loved this comment because I feel like it examined sort of the bad parts of being knowledgeable instead of being present in that moment with her child. She's trying to find themes and sort of analyze that music instead of just being in it with her child. And this finding I would consider unique to this study, but that is because there's only one other music therapy study that didn't have this finding. So now we're on sort of the second part of the impact, how new insights from being a parent were now being brought into interactions with clients and the clients' parents. So there's empathy and new experiences here. Leslie had a moment where she was working in a inpatient mental health facility, and something that she brought up was that there was a woman there, and she realized for the first time that like this woman might not have access to a breast pump, as she knew from her charts that she had had a baby recently. She shared with us that never would have crossed her mind before, but now she had that experience behind it. So she was more empathetic in that sense. And then Lynn shared some new experiences. Things were getting fired up in a way that she just didn't have the experience. And she said the experience affords perspective. I didn't have the experience to afford me the perspective to recognize some of those contextual pieces that now I look for everywhere. And so that definitely changed. Something that I think is important to touch on with both of these comments, and something that came to my mind throughout the study, is that idea of being a blank canvas when you enter the session. I think a lot of us are taught that in undergrad. And the more we get to know ourselves and the more studying we do, we realize that there are no blank canvases. Everybody has so many different experiences. And the way that I started to think about this was like a collage. When you become a parent, just more pieces of art are added to you. Nothing is necessarily taken away. It doesn't make you more beautiful. It just adds more to you. So now that you have those, new pieces of paper on your artwork, you recognize those in somebody else. And so they're recognizing things in other people that they might not have noticed previously. And then I think Lynn puts it really beautifully, just experience affords perspective. And then going to sort of a discussion part, 3 other studies were finding that participants had increased empathy after becoming parents as well. So we are aligning with that. Third theme was a juggling act, finding a balance and career choices with family in mind. So balance is something that emerged multiple times throughout the focus group conversation. Participants shared that they needed to find balance everywhere in their lives. In addition to their full-time jobs and having partners, they now had a life that was literally dependent on them for survival. All 4 of these parents did return to work in some capacity after having a child. That did change years down the road, but all 4 of these women did return. And then they found that they needed a way to divide their time between work and their child and their partner, just to make sure that every part of them was being taken care of. Lynn again talks about being responsible for herself, and then later on having to reorganize, grow, develop, and change. She says that last sentence, I'm still responsible for all of those things, but now also for this whole other life. Again, I really like this concept of reorganizing. It made me think, I put this in the thesis at some point, but like taking things, items, and reorganizing them in different boxes. You're not throwing away those items, but some of them hold different weight at different points in life. I think as a parent too, even minute by minute, she's reorganizing and figuring out what needs to happen in order for everything that needs to happen. And then that imagery of striking a balance or juggling did appear in 3 other studies: Dandoyal, Jalowick, and Wolf. So career choices with family in mind. Some statements in this focus group made it clear that finding a daily balance between work and personal lives is just sometimes not enough for them. Becoming a parent introduced a new type of balance, which meant that careers sometimes needed to shift to accommodate for the new family addition. So there's 2 sort of different thoughts that came across: leaving and staying in terms of the workplace. Anne shared that she never wanted to stay at home. There was an issue with her work where they said when she returned from maternity leave, they kind of went back on what they had said they could offer her. And so they said, okay, it's either full-time or no time. And she said no time, which is something that she shares later that she never would have done or never thought she would have done because she didn't even think she wanted kids or was going to have kids. And then in terms of staying, Pat shared that she didn't think she'd ever be okay with staying put. Earlier in the focus group, she talked about in terms of her music therapy, like career, she used the term dip her toes in psych, and then maybe intellectual developmental disabilities, and maybe children. She wanted to experience it all. But then after she had a child, she decided that she was okay with staying put because it felt like the smart choice for her family at that time. Robinson also had found that career plans were disrupted due to having children. One thing I did want to say about this is in Robinson's study and this study, it was only birth-giving parents that were interviewed. So this could be a different finding if there were parents who did not give birth, just because of how our society is kind of formulated, where typically women stay home. So the last theme was the biggest one, and it's an expansion of self. This one was hard for me to find the right wording for, because I felt like when I was using growth or expansion, it meant that it was like taking action steps towards becoming whole. And that's not what was coming across. They're not becoming better or more whole. It's just that they're changing. There's differences are happening. They're expanding their experiences, and not becoming a better therapist or a better person just because they're becoming a parent. First one is changing your priorities. This is something that I didn't find in the literature. It was unique to this study. Robinson did have one participant that shared that she learned to slow down and appreciate the different aspects of life, but that was just sort of a one-off comment. It wasn't a full finding in his study, whereas there was a lot of change in priorities in this present study. And we see Pat, I really like how she put it. This was one of my favorite quotes is, everything else in the world that is not my son is just stupid. And I think that that's beautifully put. And I think a lot of people might resonate with that after having children. Then Lynn shared a little bit about her change in priorities in the sense of that the amount of time with her kids is limited. Kids are changing minute by minute and they're growing overnight. So she was saying she was going to prioritize whatever was necessary to engage with her children in a way that fulfilled her. And the other one I did take out, but I did want to mention here was there was a participant who used to stay late with her interns and give them all the time that they needed and stay off the clock and speak with them. And that was something that she completely cut out after having a child. She said that she obviously still loves and appreciates her interns, but she realized that she'd rather be at home with her family. Whereas before that was a big priority and something she prided herself on was being available for the interns anytime they needed. So navigating morals and values. Being responsible for a kid sort of holds a mirror up to the parents. Sort of the questions are, what do they want their child to become, to value, to fight for? This now becomes a time of navigation and determining what is important to the parent and how this is going to be upheld in the home to set examples for the child. So in Lynn's comment on the left, we see her highlight the fact that all participants went through the same program, which could be a reason that everybody sort of connected on this point. Where Lynn is sort of talking about, being through this program, if we highlight that, but then she also sets that aside saying, if you're just a conscious human, you're going to pick up on how there's some really problematic things that are intergenerationally repeated. And then Pat later was talking about this same idea, just saying that she wants to be a model for her son. And so she felt a personal conviction to expose him to music specifically that shaped her and that has been important to her. So authenticity was another point that was not really found in the literature. This is related to the navigation of morals and values, just the idea of being authentic. This first quote by Lynn, that was the very first thing that came out of anybody's mouth once we started the focus group. The first question was a very broad, like, how has parenthood changed you? And Lynn was really quick and very thoughtful. Everybody was thoughtful throughout the entire experience, but Lynn was very quick to share this sort of piece of authenticity where children force you to refine habits and tendencies that you thought you worked out 10 and 15 years ago. And now you realize you're actually not as good as you thought you were at that thing. Now you're putting in a new practice every day while you're repairing yourself. I thought that was really important. And then the other one that I wanted to say, it's not just people that are parents that have chances to be authentic, obviously, but it's the fact that there's little people around that. I think Lynn was the one that said it at some point. She's used the words like biologically programmed to mimic your behaviors. There's all of a sudden an extra set of, an extra person that is completely modeling their life after you. And it sort of gives that sense of like, oh, I need to be doing things the way that I say I want them to be done. This was something that was unique to the study. There was another finding that Robinson had where participants said they felt like it was important for their children to be caring and helpful towards others, but they didn't really relate them back to themselves as they were that way, and they want their children to also be that way by being authentic to themselves. So I sort of would still say that this is unique where Robinson wanted, Robinson wanted those behaviors for the children, whereas the parents here wanted to be the models of that behavior, not just want their children to end up that way. So they wanted to be authentic to themselves. You also have a change in attitude. This one was Anne's. So parenthood exposes the parent to new experiences that they may not encounter elsewhere. The subtheme I think is really important, even though it was largely based off of one comment by Anne. It did sort of lurk behind the conversations throughout the entire focus group, but nobody quite said it like Anne. She had a clinical experience with kids and she said it went not well. And then when her supervisor asked what had happened, she said, well, they had boogers and she wanted nothing to do with them. And then later on, she shared that she actually likes kids. She switched her practice to being sound birthing and works alongside children. So her attitude shifted a little bit and she had a different appreciation and understanding. Her way of thinking sort of expanded and changes took place. This was similar to Robinson. Robinson's finding was just a blanket statement that motherhood creates change, where this is like a change in attitude. So I do feel like those align with one another, being changed. Another finding, the last finding was becoming flexible. So being a parent means you're dealing with lots of unexpected challenges. So these parental experiences sort of changed from maternity leave and began to change the participants' ways of like actually belonging in the world. Leslie shared that she used to be very schedule oriented before becoming a parent, and now she's really learning how to be flexible at the time of the study. And then Lynn shared she likes to think she would have done this even if she hadn't been a parent. So she's speaking about completely changing the way an internship was going to work. She had an intern coming in. They wanted just a very non-traditional internship. It was like part-time here and part-time there, and it was going to last 7 months instead of 6. It was a very confusing way. And so Lynn was kind of saying before having a child, she probably would have just been like, nope. But after having a parent or being a parent, she realized that there was more flexibility that she could give, and there was no real reason to say no to this person. And throughout the conversation, she was sort of saying that she wishes that people were more flexible with her, because after becoming a parent, she realized that there doesn't always have to be this rigidity in everything. If you can accommodate, you can accommodate. I think flexibility sort of came in Din Doyal's study, where they found that parents were more flexible, but in self-disclosure specifically than they were prior to having children. And again, that was just in sharing what was going on in their own lives. I think one of the examples in that study was that, beforehand, if somebody was sick, they'd just cancel sessions, but now they were canceling it and giving the specific reason as my child is sick for their clients. So in conclusion, many of the findings did echo what existed in the pre-existing literature surrounding parenthood as a clinician. Through that existing research, there were no music therapy studies except for that one. And so I think that point of reciprocal impacts between music therapy impacting parenting and parenting impacting the clinical relationship was very interesting. The other studies that we sort of talked about that were unique was the lack of support in the workplaces being felt, there being a new pressure in navigating the personal morals and values, and the large shift in priorities. As far as limitation goes, there was quite a few limitations. I really wish that we had a participant that had not given birth. I think that would have added a whole nother layer and a really great perspective that we didn't hear from. There were no LGBTQ plus participants. All of the participants were very similar in a lot of ways. They were all married. 3 out of the 4 identified as white, and 3 out of the 4 lived in the same state. They had all been through the Slippery Rock Masters in Music Therapy program. And lastly, there was just a very small sample size. So we did get a small snapshot into what was happening, because all these experiences are valid and they are what these women are sharing. However, I think that there could be a wider net cast to get an even more rounded understanding of exactly how parenthood is impacting music therapists. As far as implications for a profession, I feel like self-care is something that's talked about a lot and something that's focused on a lot. When first becoming a music therapist, that's something they always warn you about. There wasn't any sort of class or class topic or like warning about major life changes that would happen that many people experience, such as parenthood or, deaths in the family or something like this. So I think that there could be just more education surrounding like large events that go on in life and how they may change you, like according to research that's been done. So maybe possibly CEUs, I think, could be interesting to offer on this, because I couldn't find any from what I was looking through. And then maybe in undergrad or something, there could be just like a small sliver, a module in music therapy classes about just large common life events and how it seems to impact clinicians, so people understand sort of what they're getting into when they go through these big life events. Also, I think supervision groups would be really helpful. If they do exist, it'd be great for them to have more advertising. I think it would be really great for supportive groups that consist of parents who are already parents as clinicians and those who are planning to become parents, all to just get together with one another, talk about their current caseloads. I personally, when watching these women speak, I felt so like validated and heard, even though I was not speaking at all. Leslie said something very similar. She, at the very end, like once we had closed everything down, she was just like, oh, I feel so much lighter. Like, you all know exactly what I'm going through. I don't know anybody that's a music therapist and a parent. And so they were just talking for quite a few minutes, the whole group, about like how nice it was to speak to people that understood more or less what was going on in each other's lives, because they had very similar lives. For future research, I think a wider variety of participants would be great. Also, parents with older children or adult children. I realized that the oldest child was 5. So all of these parents were still new, not new parent, but within 5 years of becoming parents. So I think having a perspective from somebody that had been parenting longer would have been interesting. Reciprocal impacts could be further explored, specifically in music therapy. I also thought it would be interesting, kind of as the women were speaking about music, maybe there's a study revolving around how like the clinician's child's relationship with music forms and sort of what that experience is like for them, having a music therapist parent. And then another sort of idea I had was just how the music therapist's personal relationship with music has changed since having children. That was something that was touched on a little bit, but I think that it could be sort of a wider conversation that we have. And that is my PowerPoint. So I'd love to open it up for questions and clarification. Thank you for listening.
I just want to start by saying, well done, Heidi. I have not, in the whole time I've known you, heard you talk for that amount of time.
Yeah, I'm normally just quiet. I like to listen more.
Maybe even for way less time, but that was really well done. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Now you can take a breath, and I'm going to open it up to Katie first.
All right. Well, great job. I thought, honestly, as soon as so I'll disclose, I have 3 kids, and I had my 3rd while I was writing my dissertation. So congratulations. I know how hard it is. I can't even imagine having deleted your thesis and starting from scratch. So good for you for pushing through and persevering through that. You should be really proud of yourself, because that's hard. I mean, and being a new mom is hard. It is a very hard thing to navigate.
Yes.
So congratulations, you did it. Yay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
But I thought it was a really interesting, I thought it was very well written. I guess one of my questions was, I had kind of, I guess, 2. Was there anyone that kind of took over the focus group? And if so, how did you kind of navigate that?
I don't know that I would say it took over. There were participants, like I used a lot of Lynn's quotes, because Lynn would speak and just have, Lynn spoke the most, I think, if we're saying it that way, and in very meaningful and beautiful ways. And then there were other participants that were just quietly listening and really listening to what Lynn had to say. Before moving from topic to topic, I always was like, oh, Pat, I noticed you didn't say anything. Or, oh, Leslie, I noticed you didn't say anything. Like, do you want to add? So I made sure everybody had a chance. And whenever I did sort of open it back up to everybody, those participants did include their own thoughts. I think there was one time, though, where Pat was just like, I don't know that I have an answer. I love listening to everybody. But other than that, once they did get that area to speak, they did. But Lynn was very passionate about the subject, and I was grateful because she gave a lot of great thoughts.
Nice. I was also wondering about the theme of the juggling act.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you had considered maybe putting that under challenges, or why you didn't put it as a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I hadn't really thought of that, to be very honest with you. I think it could be a challenge, because it is challenging trying to find all of those balances. Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer for that, other than like I'm not sure that I really thought of that. It just felt separate to me. But thinking about it now, I do think that it could fit under challenges.
And that's just my
yeah.
Yeah, that's just, when I hear juggling, I'm like, oh, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And that's just me, other people maybe like the juggling act and might not see it as a challenge. So yeah.
If that went there, that would just make it 3 main themes with more under challenges. So I mean, it could still work without much of a shift, really, if you felt like it.
And I'm trying to go back to juggling. What was the other? Oh, career choices with family in mind. I think that, sorry, thinking about it now on the spot. I think I would have a hard time putting career choices with family in mind under a challenge, because a lot of these women, they didn't say that that was hard for them. It was just something that changed. So maybe that could have been its own theme. Finding a balance, I think, could be a challenge, but I'm not sure that making career choices with your family in mind, I would classify as a challenge. Oh, there she is.
Maybe like your implications instead of juggling.
What was that?
But I said maybe like career implications instead of juggling act. And just a thought. I'm not.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, that would have been good. Thank you.
But that's it. I thought you did a great job. I thought it was really interesting. Yeah, I'll scan everything and send it to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
I was also going to say, now that someone's left, that it may be that the person who spoke the most, just from me figuring out who must be who from their quotes, the person who seemed to have spoken the most is also the person who had 3 children and everybody else had 1. So she had a lot more experience. I mean, she talks a lot anyway, but she had a lot more experience as a parent.
I did put trying to find where I wrote that it would have been interesting to have maybe even like a table with the pseudonym, how many kids they had and their ages and where they work. Because I was trying to make the connection, like, is that the person who works at the behavioral health place? I was trying to...
No, I agree. That would have been helpful. When I did do it, it was very clear who was who. And I tried to like make it as anonymous as possible, but there was one participant who was like, oh, I'm the only person in this area who, and so like they were very worried about being part of the study. And so when I was trying to make something that the reader can just sort of picture everybody, it wasn't working out that way. But yeah, it would have been nice to have
That makes sense though. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, there was only one person who wasn't white in that group, and it was just too many obvious markers that would have made the confidentiality difficult. So that was why the compilation thing happened. Do you have more questions or comments there, Katie?
No, I'm done. I thought it was great. I think honestly, I was reading it and I was thinking I wish some of our doctorate students wrote this well, because I have 2 dissertations right now that are awful. Like terrible. And I was thinking like, why can't they write? I thought it was very well written. I thought you did a great job, Heidi.
Thank you. It took a lot of quitting for weeks at a time and then coming back to it, and Sue being like, hey, you said it was going to be done 6 months ago. And so it took a while, but thank you.
But you did it. So you
Thank
should be
you.
really proud of yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. I am.
Vern, what do you have to add?
I agree. Nice work. It was really, thank you. It was great to read it. I guess, I don't know. I feel scattered, so I'll try to be, this won't be methodical. I just do have a couple things, if that's okay. Oh, so the choice for these particular participants, I guess I'm curious about why these people versus maybe casting a different net, or, you know, because I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, it was due to time constraints, which kind of, you know, I ended up not doing it in the time frame that it was going to be done. So kind of I could have casted. I did think about doing like one of those AMTA master emails, but then just the amount of time it would take and then finding the right participants and sampling from everything, I just I felt like that was too time consuming, to be honest. And then, Dr. Hadley did know these people, and she said that they would be, great participants and would talk enough for me to get good data. And I guess that's sort of the reason why I went with the 6 that we did go with.
It was a convenient sample because we had lost a lot of time, and
Yeah.
Right.
we had a baby, and
I was
had a
so
degree.
when I started, I was like, I'm not going to be, not that there's anything wrong, but I'd seen faces go through the program that were here for years working on their thesis. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be that person. It'll be one semester, like maybe, a semester and a half for me to do my thesis. And it's been, I don't even know, like 2 years I've been working on my thesis or something. Just things kept happening that, by the time we found this point, it was just like, we'd just like to move forward with whatever we can, to be very honest.
The feeling is very real. I'm working on a dissertation right now.
Okay.
I relate. I
Okay.
concur. In your presentation, you used constructivist. In your paper, you said constructionist. So
That's
I would
because
just.
I'm trying to get them to shift to constructionist.
Oh, okay. I was curious. I was just curious.
Yeah, and it's from the Matinee 2019 article about different knowledge. He doesn't call them paradigms. Do you have that article? Knowledge frameworks. But he's talking about objectivist, constructionist, and subjectivist, not the whole interpretivist, positivist. And then he puts all the things underneath. And so as a framework, he uses constructionist, and then as a method, I think the epistemological framework he calls constructionist, and I think there are methodologies that he might call constructivists.
Okay, interesting.
And it depends on, like, he defines it all. It's through the philosophies that he's been reading, and he critiques it. He critiques a lot of people who've written about epistemology. He and Claire Getty and Melody Schwantes have been meeting together for a long time, and they've just started these epistemology groups once a month that I've been going to, and just trying to figure out some of the ways in which we use language incorrectly. And it aligns with a lot of the things that George often complains about. So anyway, I changed it in the paper, and yeah.
So it might be good to cite that article when using that term, just for people like me who aren't familiar with it. Then I could.
Can I send you the article to you?
Where is it?
I'll get it for you, but
Okay.
There is a mistake in it. That they printed something wrong in it, but never mind. The other thing is that you can also start joining the group if you like. One page started coming, so did I, in case.
I want this more than
anything.
I was gonna say more than Dairy Queen, but
wow, that's pretty good.
But that is a lot, but I do want Dairy Queen. And then like I didn't have this thought, and I hesitate to even bring this up, but this thought came maybe in the last 5 seconds of your presentation. I thought, well, we're talking about mothers. I wonder if we talked about parents, how different this would be. Would we find anything else? Like I know that my experience of becoming a parent is very different than my wife's experience, and how that changed or maybe didn't change my role as a music therapist, in maybe some of the same ways. Like I feel like my wife would very much identify with all the things that you were talking about in this, and her, I mean, she's a school counselor, but very kind of, I think she would really identify. And there's things where I was like, oh, like I could see that for other people, but that wasn't my experience. And I don't know. But like I appreciate the centering of the women's voices, and but I don't know. I was just kind of curious if that's something you had considered, or
Yeah. Initially, we did have one father participant, and I never intended it to be mothers.
Okay.
It just ended up that way. When he dropped out, I almost moved the entire focus group just to have him join, but it was not working. But yeah, I really did want that voice in those stories, because it's different. Like it is. And we didn't get that here, but I think I said in future research, like maybe casting that wider net and getting the fathers or the non-birthing parents. Mm-hmm.
And then I could be wrong. I might be wrong, but when I was reading your paper versus the presentation, I feel like in the presentation you mentioned some things about your data collection and how you were working with it, that I don't know that you mentioned in the paper, or maybe didn't make it as clear as you did in the presentation. And I really appreciate what you raised in the presentation. So I would encourage you to put those things in the paper about how, because I remember reading about like member checking,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like you mentioned maybe a couple of other things. I was like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So
Okay.
I don't know, maybe just something to check out. I could, and again, I might have missed it when I read it. It was 6 a.m. this morning. And then in the lit review, did you check out related fields and see if there was anything there? Yeah. Okay. Maybe I missed that as well. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I think in the chat I just sent you that article.
Thank you.
It would be interesting one time to do maybe a study with people in Vern's part of life, where they have kids and they have parents who might be going through things, like when you're at that stage where you've got both sort of parents aging and children growing, because that's a whole new lot of things that might bring different kinds of empathy into the workspace and different kinds of challenges, because it's just that the time when we're most generative in our workspace is also the times that we're looking after both sides of our lineage. So that could be an interesting future research. You made me think about, I've just got a group of people who are doing a certain kind of practice that want to have supervision with me all together. But I was just thinking, I'm giving supervision to one of your participants. And I was thinking about how my ability to understand a lot of the things going on for her because of being a parent and a spouse and working and being an older parent, when starting to have children older, or being older when you have a young child, and I was thinking, oh wow, I could actually, if I felt like increasing my practice, have like group supervision for young music therapy parents.
That's great.
And they probably would get a lot out of each other because they would share things that other people wouldn't. But yeah, you had me thinking about that, which I wasn't really. I think it was when you were saying, implications of this. One of those things being supervision groups, and I hadn't really thought about that.
Very cool.
You've had a lot of feedback from me over the time of writing, so I'm not going to add anything else. I am so glad that you finished. I'm so proud that you hung in there. I think this became way more meaningful than you thought it was going to.
Mhm.
And you were just like, yes, I'm just going to do it to get it done. But then it became, you got all into it
Mhm.
in a way that, is great. So you found your right topic, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I was excited about the imposter syndrome one, but never in the same way as this one. And I realized like I would get so, I'd set it aside for like a few days or a few weeks, but then every time I picked this one back up, I'd be so motivated. Like I would start and I'd just start rolling and I would love it. And then the second I put it down, life would happen. But that never happened with my other topic. I'd pick it up and it was hard. Well, this was hard work, but like it was hard to even care sometimes. Whereas this one, I was so passionate and I read through it like for my own personal knowledge sometimes. And I found the right one. And thank you for showing me that it was out there and helping me so much. Thank
Well,
you.
I just was, Vern knows me long enough. Well, both Katie and Vern have known me for a really long time, but Katie longer actually. But I think sometimes I just have to see how somebody has responded to the idea, and if I feel like it's hit, then I know they've got the right one. And I just felt like it hit with you, and it was only listening to everything that you were feeling that I was
Mhm.
why don't you just do something on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. I'm just so glad that you've persevered.
Thank you. Me too.
And now you can go and, I don't know, have a drink.
Yeah. No, it's Eli's bedtime. I'm gonna go put him to bed. Haven't seen him yet today, so I want to milk that 20 minutes, but
Yeah, I thought he was actually going to show up in your defense.
might have.
I actually said to Katie, he might show up, and she was like, that's fine. And then their child shows up. Usually it's Vern's child.
No, he's downstairs. I was like, I need to focus, but it's hard, as you all know. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate that how much time and energy that the readers put in, especially you two, like all these past few years. Like I've grown a lot and I've learned a lot. And I think, we're done and it feels good. So thank you all. I really do appreciate your time.
Well, congratulations. You are now, Master of Music Therapy.
Thank you.
I
Yes.
will make sure everything's put through appropriately.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take care.